Hello and welcome back to my mother's diaries. This is Andy Vining, and we start now with episode 8, January 1949. We begin a brand new year now, January 49, a time when winter still grips the countryside, but the promise of a fresh year lies ahead. There is always a sense of quiet optimism at the start of a new year. New plans, small hopes, and a simple rhythm of family farm life continuing day by day. So let us now step back together into that January and hear how the year began through my mother's own words. January of 1949 began in rather trying fashion. The weather was dreadful and the children, full of leftover Christmas excitement, seemed determined to drive me quite mad. The house was noisy from morning until evening, and by the afternoon I'd had quite enough. So, 4 o'clock, I escaped and I went round to the Beatons for a cup of tea, leaving the children to play on their own for a while. It was a blessed relief. It is amazing what a cup of tea and a friendly chat can do to restore one's spirits. Later that evening, after I returned home, I turned up the hem of a new skirt and a girl came round asking about a job. It seemed we might have a little help in the house after all, something that always makes life easier for me when there are children, hens, and endless chores to be done. Soon afterwards, we went to see my sister Betty, who was at Beechcroft, and we brought Mother back home with us. It was lovely to have her with us again. A few days later, the new girl, also called Betty, arrived, and she seemed bright and cheerful, for which I was thankful for. A willing pair of hands makes a world of difference in a busy household. Between the house and the farm, there were always something waiting to be done. I dug up the gladioli bulbs in the garden, and one evening I dyed an evening slip from mauve to pink, which amused me no end, and it was very successful. It looked quite nice. I also began altering a navy evening dress, a task which went on for days and which I grew to dislike more with every stitch. The children, of course, had their own adventures. Jennifer went to a Sunday school party dressed as Prince Charming, which she thoroughly enjoyed. Andrew went off to tea with Malcolm West, and Joan called in that day, as she often did, and the evening was spent darning, as so many evenings seemed to be. John and I went shopping in Eastleigh one day, and that evening Frank Dean called in, along with Les Emery, a farmer from Fair Oak. And after they'd gone, I carried on with my sewing, altering the girls' long frocks ready for a party. A mother's sewing basket never seems to be shut for long. I even managed to go to the hairdressers. It was quite a luxury, before finishing the girls' party dresses and altering the necks of their vests. On Saturday, the 8th of January, it was a big day, with all the children going to a big party at the Potter's Heron Hotel at the end of Hook Road. John went to Hursley for a Masonic meeting, and that evening Mother, Bella, Bet and Fred all came round for supper, which made the house very lively and cheerful. The following day was a lovely one. Joan and Roger and Les came for tea, and I spent some time finishing the alterations on my evening dress, because we were all going to a dance the very next night. In the morning we went shopping, and then in the evening to the Eastleigh Police Ball. It was a jolly good dance. We really had a great time. And we did not get home until the small hours of the morning, which is always a problem, seeing as we had to get up so early to milk. But when we got back, we crept into the kitchen. The white hyacinth had just come into bloom, and the scent filled the whole room and made the house feel warm and welcoming after our late return. The next afternoon, Margaret Haskell came to tea. We even practiced a little dancing all together in the sitting room. John did a little dad dancing too, which was a really good laugh and really funny. However, he'd had enough and slept the rest of the evening afterwards. Farm life, of course, carried on steadily alongside everything else, milking every day, looking after the pigs and the chickens, and they needed constant attention. Joan came round one day and helped wash all the eggs, an endless task when you keep as many hens as we have. I walked over to Beechcroft, and that evening Phil and Eric Coates came for supper. We had eggs and bacon, followed by lemon meringue pie, which was superb. And on the 11th of January at last, the children went back to school. the house suddenly felt quieter, and I took the opportunity to have a proper wash up and finish the week's darning. Norman telephoned to ask John to go with him for a Jersey sale in Reading, which he did the following day. And then on the 14th of January, I took Jennifer and Janet to see Ethel Moore's dancing display, and that was very good. On the Saturday, John and Leslie took the children to a pantomime in Bournemouth. Quite an outing for them, and they all had a wonderful time. Friends and family were always dropping in. Mother and Bella came for tea on Sunday, along with Nora and Stanley. Joan and Les came round for supper that evening, and it was a feast of fried eggs and bacon for everyone. Just superb. Around the house, I continued with my little projects, digging up bulbs, dyeing slips, and battling with that navy evening dress which I'd come to quite hate. One bright morning I ironed before lunch, and Joan came in and helped wipe up. Later, I tried once again to improve that troublesome dress. Then work began in the kitchen. The tiling men arrived and made a most dreadful mess. Dust and tools everywhere, scattered across the room. It took all my patience to keep things in order. I escaped for a while by going dancing at the hall one afternoon, and then later John and I drove over to Flexford to look at the rabbit wires, and we brought home 3 rabbits that we'd captured to go into the pot. Then came Hedda's birthday. The children danced for me to celebrate, and Mother came for tea. By then I had finally finished that dreadful evening dress, thank goodness. Outside in the garden, the first snowdrops had appeared. Always such a cheerful sight after winter, and for several days the kitchen remained in chaos, while the work tiling continued. I spent time tidying up all around it all the time, while carrying on with more darning as I went along. John went off to a committee meeting in Eastleigh. Then another day I took Jennifer into Eastleigh for her scholarship examination. That evening we went to the Young Farmers' Dance in Romsey with Joan and Les and a few others. It was great fun, a really good dance. Then back home the kitchen still needed attention. Leslie came and distempered the walls, which meant another frantic afternoon tidying up the mess after him. And Mother and Bella came for tea again. They often come to see us now, and that day I collected 82 eggs from 85 hens. A great day, an excellent result from those lovely hard-working girls. We ordered flower seeds from Scats, ready to plant, and John painted the wall above the new tiles in the kitchen. It looked very nice when it was finished. One day the weather was so dreadful that nothing would dry, and I could not iron in the evening. So instead I called to see Marjorie and Joan for a cup of tea, and later spent a quiet evening by the fire reading. There was dancing again at the hall on a lovely day, while John went off to a Growmore quiz where his team actually won. Joan and I walked over to Flexford one afternoon, and we picked a few snowdrops, though not many were out yet. Jess Roffrey called in, and John went to another committee meeting in Eastleigh, which he often does. We also arranged our holiday at Bracklesham Bay Holiday Camp for the summer, which gave us something pleasant to look forward to. Soon afterwards, though, Jennifer and Andrew both went down with colds, and they had to stay in bed. John went hare shooting, and I went into Southampton and bought a new pair of shoes. Mother and Bella came to tea again, and they stayed for supper. As the children began to recover, Joan Bucket and her boys came to tea from Eastleigh, and Joan Beaton called in as well, a real houseful. Mr. Cross came round, and we prepared the eggs ready for the Growmore show the next day. And then on Saturday the 29th, Jennifer had Hatley's donkey over from the sawmills, which caused enormous excitement, and she gave Malcolm, Judith and Veronica rides, while the adults all sat in the kitchen chatting. John went to Winchester with Norman to watch the boxing that evening, while I stayed home and worked on my little ready-cut rug. The next day, Betty, our new help, didn't turn up, which was rather annoying. So we'll see what happened there, but I suspect she's decided not to come any more. So I cycled over to Flexford and picked snowdrops. Mr. Cross came round later with good news. We had won 2 first prizes in the Growmore competition, and a second prize for his eggs and bunch snowdrops, and that pleased us all enormously. Towards the end of the month, I went into Southampton again and bought a costume for Genesis' birthday. By then, Janet caught the cold as well. What a problem. Joan came round once more to wash eggs with me. She is a great help, and in the evening I did the ironing, and Eric Coates came to call. And so January came quietly to its close. It'd been a month much like so many others, full of small happenings, visitors at the door, children's laughter, back to school, sewing baskets, hens to tend, eggs to wash, and countless cups of tea, cows to milk, and yet those small moments are what make a life. The first snowdrops had appeared in the garden. The hens were laying well, and the house, though often noisy, was full of warmth and family. And as the new year settled in, we carried on with a simple, busy rhythm of home and farm, not knowing, of course, what the rest of 1949 might bring. And so that is where we leave January of 1949. And so we move on to February. February has arrived, still deep in winter, cold mornings and short days, but there's always a quiet sense that spring cannot be far away. Snowdrops had begun to appear. The hens continued their steady work, and the life on the farm carried on with its familiar rhythm. Betty was still away, but I don't know why yet, and Janet was still in bed with the children's cold, though she managed to get up for some tea. Unfortunately, I caught the same cold myself, and I felt quite rotten. Still, there was work to be done, and I spent the day getting through a great pile of darning. The next day was lovely and bright, so I kept Janet at home and let her potter about quietly. I popped round to Beechcroft with some laundry, and Joan came over for a little lesson on drawing a chicken, something that amused us both. Later, I tidied the bedroom and worked a little more on my rug. Soon, the house became busy with preparations for Jennifer's party. I spent a day cooking and baking, and also cycled over to Flexwood to pick more snowdrops. They were really out now, and I managed to gather 4 dozen bunches, which looked very pretty, and I took them up to the grocer's shop to sell, to make some pin money for myself again. One piece of news came that day as well. Unfortunately, Alf Hurst, our tractor driver, gave notice and decided to leave immediately. That'll mean a lot of extra work for John for some time before we've someone to replace him. But the following day was spent entirely in the kitchen, baking cakes and preparing food ready for the party. So that night we had chicken for dinner, which was jolly good. Joan called in again, and Mr. Cross came by in the evening. Supper that night was just cold cuts. The very next day was Jennifer's birthday, and what a day that was. Children everywhere, excitement from morning until evening, and I did not finish working the horse's head on a jumper until 12:30 that night. There were the usual gentlemen visitors calling in, and Stanley came over bringing me a cycle lamp, which was very thoughtful of him. I spent some of the day mending clothes. Around the house, John fitted a new bottom to the kitchen fire, which was very welcome, and at evening he went to a ladies' installation at Shirley, while I went to a hen party at Jones along with Mrs. Parker. Mother came one day to look after Heather while I went dancing at the Ritchie Hall, and that was most kind of her. The Haskells came for tea, and they're such good company they stayed on for supper. Farm life continued as it always does. One morning we had a pig killed, and then I cycled again over to Flexford to pick the remaining snowdrops. And Mrs. Fulbrook came to speak about working for us and agreed to start the next day, while Mrs. Marshall was arranged to begin working the following Monday. Mrs. Fulbrook arrived the next day very bright and cheerful, and proved to be a very good worker indeed. That afternoon I went to tea at Mrs. Sparks with Joan, and we also brought home a new canary, which we bought in the village. It was called Dicky. We'd been all night thinking that name up, I don't think. Later, Norman came to collect the pig's head, and I made some brawn. The next day, Mrs. Fulbrook gave the kitchen a thorough cleaning through, while Dicky, our new canary, sang happily the whole time. What a lovely, lovely thing that was. Mother came to help while I went to the hairdresser's. John went to another committee meeting that evening, and I telephoned the Beatons to invite them for supper the next day. It rained all morning, though the afternoon turned out pleasant enough. But there was excitement in the yard. A cow slipped her calf, and the vet had to come to see to it. But luckily the calf survived, so that was another addition to our family. That evening, Joan and Les Beaton came for supper as arranged, and we talked so long we went very late to bed. Janet was still not feeling too well the following day, but I went round to the Parkers to look at their chickens. They had something needed attention, and we arranged for a new man to move into the cottage at Flexford to replace Alf Hurst, who left last week. Monday brought washing day. Though the weather was not good for drying, Mother and Bella came to tea later, and that evening there was a young Conservative dance at the Ritchie Hall, which turned out to be a very good evening indeed. We had a lovely time. Janet was still home the next day, but I had to cycle over to the Ritchie Hall, for dancing, and later spent the evening at Tommy Parker's, Joan and Leslie's next door neighbours. Tommy had played football for Southampton and Arsenal football clubs, and was also manager of Norwich and Southampton in 1937 to 1943. And of course, John spent many hours talking football with him. Another day, I helped John put up moving chicken units called arks in the front field for the chickens to be ready and to laying there. And then I walked round to Beechcroft that evening, and I settled down to a long session of darning. That day, we'd put all the chickens in the new arks, and Joan came up, and we went to them in the fields collecting the eggs, and then we had to wash them. Later, we went to the pictures with Joan and Les to see a film called The Rope. Wasn't bad. John went off to a Masonic meeting in Southampton, and Mother and Bella came round as well again. One sad piece of news came that week. Mr. Druitt died. He was such a nice man, a sad loss. Nora and the family called in, and Mother and Bella looked after the children while we went to a dance in Eastleigh that evening. We had been busy celebrating things. The following day, the Parkers and the Tools came for tea, and we went round to the Beatons for supper. Tommy Parker's hen Claire had laid her very first egg, which caused some amusement. Just one egg, and we were getting hundreds. Very funny. The rain returned the next morning, but cleared later in the day. I managed to get the washing iron in the afternoon. Joan came round to help me wash the eggs. She is such a great help doing that for me, as it is such a big job now. Margaret Haskell came for tea, and in the evening I worked again on my ready-cut rug, while John went to a lodge of instruction. The day of Mr. Druitt's funeral arrived, and we attended that, but it was a sombre occasion, very sad. The next day there was dancing in the afternoon, and John went to another Masonic meeting in Eastleigh. Mother kindly looked after the children while Joan and I went to the pictures and saw a film called The Foxes of Hanoi. The next morning I woke up with a stiff neck. I don't really know why, but I still went for a walk and called in to see Marjorie West, who was in bed with pleurisy, poor dear, but she seemed a little better now. I also called in to see Mrs. St. John about the village play, and had tea at Jones, and Frank White and Mr. Cross called later that evening as well. The hens continued their work as always, and another goose egg appeared one day from nowhere. I went to Beechcroft, where Nora was there and Mr. Abel was visiting. That evening, John and Les went to a Growmore quiz, but Joan was feeling rather unwell, so I stayed with her at her home. Towards the end of the month, the children went off to stay with Betty in London. I saw them off at Eastleigh Station and felt quite sad watching them go, though when I telephoned later, they all sounded very happy, not missing home at all. That evening, I went round to Jones, and later we attended the Snowball Tea Dance at the Cadena in Winchester. It was a jolly good evening indeed, and we did not get in bed until 3:30 in the morning, late again, and had struggled to get up the next day. Mother and Bella had stayed overnight, and they left after breakfast the next morning. Later, Mrs. St. John telephoned with great news. Jennifer had passed her scholarship exam. We were all delighted. John spent the day at football and a poultry show in Eastleigh, while I visited Joan and Marjorie again in Pine Road. Another day, Cross came in the morning, and we went to see the council houses that Les's firm were building. Afterwards, we had tea at Joan's, and I worked a little more on my rug. Then came a beautiful day to finish the month. I had all the ironing done by lunchtime, and I went to Eastleigh to meet the children arriving back from Betty's. It was lovely to have them home again. Later, Mr. and Mrs. Court came to visit. They are very pleasant people, and we have spent a quiet time chatting with them. And so February drew quietly to its close. February had been a busy winter month, full of small happenings, family visits, dancing evenings, farm work, parties, and a steady routine of home. There had been endless celebrations, good news and sad news too, and a canary chirping a lot in the background. But the snowdrops were blooming, the hens were laying well, and the days were slightly growing longer. And with spring not too far away, life on the farm continued just as it always had. Busy, ordinary, and full of small moments worth remembering. Thank you for listening to my mother's diaries. I do hope you'll join me again next Sunday when we will turn another page together and see what March and April of 1949 have in store for us. So, until next time, keep well and keep turning the pages of the past. Thank you, thank you, thank you.